Well, shalom, my name is Todd Bennett, and I'll be reading the weekly newsletter that is sent out through Shema Yisrael. You can sign up for the newsletter at shemayisrael.net, and I'll be trying to read them and post them on YouTube for those that aren't subscribed or are new to the messages or to the work at shemayisrael.net. The message from Day 21 of month 9 on the Creator's calendar, also known as December 4th, 2021, was titled, In Vain They Do Worship. Now, it's interesting that we are in the month of December, and December actually comes from the Latin word deca. It literally means the 10th month. So the month of December should be the 10th month of the year. But you're being told by Babylon that it is actually the 12th month. Now, of course, those that know history realize that December actually used to be the 10th month on the ancient Roman calendar prior to 45 BC. In that year, Julius Caesar changed the times. The Roman year used to begin with March, which is very similar to the Creator's calendar that often begins at the end of March or into April. Now in 45 BC, the beginning of the year was set in January, and January is named after Janus, the two-faced Roman god that looks to the past and the future. So Rome has its fingerprints all over the present reckoning of time, utilized by much of the world. This divergence from a true reckoning of time makes for great confusion, as most people have no idea what time it is on the Creator's scriptural calendar. Those who follow the Creator's calendar anticipate month 10 beginning at the sighting of the renewed moon after sunset on December 5th. So everything points to time being at or near month 10. Nevertheless, most of the world believes we are in month 12. And once again, the power of tradition triumphs over truth. That is literally right in our face. Now, speaking of tradition, we're in a time when powerful traditions control people's behavior. Thanksgiving in America is now past, and that officially began the Christmas season with all its lights, decorations, music, and of course, shopping. The masses of conditioned consumers began their frenzied buying spree on Black Friday, and that continued on into Cyber Monday, and Americans will continue consuming on a massive scale, right on cue, all the way up to Christmas. Very few recognize that they have simply been programmed, and their actions are completely removed from the reality of Elohim. In fact, to many, this is an integral part of their religious celebration of Christmas, as they prepare to celebrate the birth of Christ. Sadly, this all has nothing to do with the birth of the Messiah. Instead, people are operating in the realm of Babylon, and Christmas is one of Babylon's Moedim. It's a Babylonian holy day, otherwise known as a holiday. Christmas is an ancient pagan tradition, and if properly observed, it's supposed to fall on the winter solstice. The winter solstice is one of 4 turns, known as tekufot in Hebrew, that literally exist within creation. There are 2 equinoxes that occur each year when the length of the light portion of a day and the dark portion of a day are equal. The summer solstice is the point when the day is the longest, and we're approaching another one of those turns, or tekufot, called the winter solstice. The winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. Now, pagans typically focus their attention around these times, these turns, because they worshipped the hosts of heaven, and they counted on and relied upon these cycles to occur every year. And just because the pagans focused on them does not detract from their significance, since it was Yah who made them all and set them in motion for his purposes. In fact, the psalmists say that the heavens declare the esteem of Elohim, and the firmament shows his handiwork. That's in Psalm 19:1. Sadly, the celebration of Christmas is an example of how the pagans, particularly sun worshippers, profane these tekufot through their religious practices. Christmas derives from the winter solstice that used to fall on December 25th in more ancient times. Due to the precession of the equinoxes, the winter solstice now falls on December 21st. It has always been an important time for sun worshippers because it's the shortest day, like I said, and therefore the darkest day of the year. From that point forward, the days get longer. So it's connected with the birth or rebirth of the sun. And that's why the birthdays of most sun gods are connected with the winter solstice. Now, Yeshua the Messiah was born on day 1 of month 7, which is Yom Teruah, also known as Day of Blasting. He was not born on December 25th. As the Roman Empire developed Christianity and separated it from its Hebrew roots, it adapted the new religion to pagan sun worship, making it easier for the pagans to convert. Of course, it wasn't necessarily a conversion, and in many ways simply involved redirection from Tammuz, Bacchus, or Dionysus worship, or even Mithras, to Isus, the child of Zeus. And that is why Christianity also adopted certain pagan festivals, such as Christmas and Easter. When Yeshua the Messiah of Israel was born just over 2,000 years ago, it was on day 1 of month 7 on the Creator's calendar, which again was an appointed time called Yom Teruah, the day of trumpets, the day of blastings. That happened to be September 11th, 3 BCE on the Gregorian calendar. And this is discussed in detail in the article titled The Birth of Yeshua the Messiah on the Torah Calendar website. And you can find that if you go to www.torahcalendar.com and just scroll down a bit, you'll find that article. And it's very detailed and describes exactly how we know when Yeshua the Messiah was born. So, if Christians really wanted to commemorate the true birth date of the Messiah of Yisrael, they would need to start reckoning time like the Creator set forth in Genesis 1:14 through 16, using the sun and the moon. That would also require them to observe the appointed time of Yom Teruah. The problem is that the Roman-derived religion of Christianity rejects the appointed times of the Creator. It calls them Jewish holidays, and even though the Creator specifically says they are His appointed times, and so anybody in covenant with Him should be observing these times, these appointments, they also have rejected the seventh-day Sabbath. Rome has instead decided to follow the traditions of Babylonian sun worship. In defiance of the authority of Yah, Rome has instituted its own Sabbath on Sunday, the venerable day of the sun, and they've made it very clear that their power to change the Sabbath from the seventh day, Shabbat, to the first day, Sunday, demonstrates the power of the church. And of course, this is untrue, and nowhere in the scriptures is the Roman Catholic Church given the authority to change the Sabbath. The Sabbath was ingrained and embedded in time from the first week of creation. This also ignores the commandments of Yah, as I said, and Christianity, they refuse to meet Him at His prescribed appointed times. And those appointed times are set forth in Leviticus 23rd. Instead, Roman Christianity has incorporated the pagan festivals of the Christ Mass and the fertility rites of the goddess Ishtar, commonly known as Easter. Now, most of you probably already know this, but it's important to be reminded that these are not minor oversights. They are intentional and monumental shifts that transfer the Christian religion and Christians out of the covenant established by Yah and into the realm of lawlessness. The Roman establishment of the Christian religion was a deliberate attempt by the enemy to divert the masses from the narrow and difficult way that leads to life onto the broad way that leads to destruction. And we read about that in Matthew 7:13 through 14. This is why so many Christians will be weeping and gnashing their teeth, because they failed to heed the warnings of the Messiah, Yeshua. When Yeshua the Messiah was born, the winter solstice actually fell on December 23rd. So if people insist on commemorating his birth at Christmas, like the pagans celebrated 2,000 years ago, they might consider celebrating on December 23rd, if they really want to be accurate. Instead, most Christians hearken back to the more ancient births of the Savior sun gods Tammuz, Dionysus, and Mithras, just to name a few. Once again, the power of tradition prevails. Even people who are acting like pagans and following pagan rituals fail to get it right because of traditions. The Christian celebration of Christmas on December 25th reveals what is truly at the core of the Christian religion, and that is Babylonian sun worship. So while most Christians think they're celebrating the birth of the Messiah of Yisrael on December 25th, they are actually commemorating the traditional birth date of ancient sun gods. And this is why it's important to understand that Christianity is the religion of the Roman Empire. While it may contain fragments of truth from the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it does not follow the ways of the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Christianity ignores the very clear words of Yeshua and often uses the writings of Paul to essentially discard the commandments. It is a lawless religion that does not follow the covenant path provided in the very Bible that they profess to revere and follow. And this was one of the earth-shattering revelations that changed the path of my life decades ago and led me to write the Walk in the Light series over the course of 14 years while traveling to the Promised Land seeking answers. What I discovered was that Christianity actually follows pagan sun worship practices. It is essentially diverting people away from the covenant of Yah under the false teaching that we don't follow the commands because we're under grace. Now, many Christian pastors and teachers are sending people away from the narrow and difficult gate that leads to life as described by Yeshua. Instead, they're herding people toward the broad way that leads to destruction. It really doesn't take much digging to figure this out, but you have to step outside of the Christian bubble in order to see it. I already discussed the shopping and materialism associated with Christmas. If that's not bad enough, then add Christmas trees, Santa Claus, elves, flying reindeer, Yule logs, and not for the faint of heart, Krampus. What on earth does any of that have to do with the birth of the Messiah? Of course, the answer is nothing. Nothing at all. It all traces back to Nimrod and various pagan practices, and even the prophet Jeremiah warned against some of these pagan practices in Jeremiah 10:2-5. He says, "Thus says Yah, do not learn the way of the Gentiles or the nations. Do not be dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the Gentiles are dismayed at them. For the customs of the peoples are futile, they're vain. For one cuts a tree from the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen, with an axe. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers so that it will not topple. They are upright like a palm tree, and they cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot go by themselves. Do not be afraid of them, nor they cannot do evil. They cannot do evil, nor can they do any good." Now, doesn't that sound an awful lot like a Christmas tree? And yet that's what people do every year. People who claim to revere the prophets, they still cut down Christmas trees and bring them into their homes and decorate them with ornaments. The scriptures forbid these practices and describe them as futile and vain. It's a form of idolatry that traces back to Babylon and the winter solstice traditions. Yah specifically tells his people not to worship him like the pagans, and we read that in Deuteronomy 12:2-4. He says, "You shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations which you shall dispossess serve their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. And you shall destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, and burn their wooden images with fire. You shall cut down the carved images of their gods and destroy their names from that place. You shall not worship Yah, your Elohim, with such things." Well, Christians generally don't heed these warnings. Instead, I see most of them setting up Christmas trees in the living rooms, and which represents the phallus of Nimrod, for goodness sake. They wish each other Merry Christmas and send little Christmas tree emojis, fully acknowledging and celebrating a pagan rite in direct contradiction to Yah and his commandments. They claim to follow him, but they refuse to obey his commandments. Even when they're told that Christmas is a pagan ritual and an abomination, most continue their celebration because it feels good. They enjoy their pagan traditions and simply don't want to give them up. They made a choice, and they're no different from the Pharisees who Yeshua chastised by stating, "Why do you also transgress the commandment of Elohim because of your tradition?" Instead of worrying about Santa, who allegedly sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake, I would be more concerned about Yah, who truly knows if you've been bad or good, or rather, lawless or righteous. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. It doesn't matter if you raised your hand to accept Jesus or said a prayer and asked Jesus into your heart at some point in your past. The only question that matters is, are you trusting in Yah for your salvation and expressing your faith by obeying him now? Are you separated from the world and living a set apart life, or have you mixed in with the world and are you participating with these festivities? It's really all a test, and so far, these are really easy tests. So, what if you don't get together with friends and family because they're acting like pagans? Maybe it's better to drive the point home and take a stand for righteousness. Maybe you need to set an example for them. Otherwise, how will they know? If you can't resist these minor temptations involving Babylonian traditions, you definitely won't be ready to shine as a light in the dark days to come. Now, I used to write these weekly messages assuming that everybody had read all of my books, but with all the new subscribers, I realized that that's not always the case. And if you're new to all this, I wrote my book entitled Restoration, and revealing that America was actually a pagan nation. And that is the ultimate irony. While I grew up believing that America was a Christian nation, I always viewed Christianity as the antithesis of paganism. It was a real awakening for me to realize that Christianity did not properly represent the teachings of the Messiah, and to the contrary, was actually a pagan religion. Instead of being a set apart religion, Christianity actually adopted and integrated pagan practices of those people who converted into the faith through a process known as syncretism. So, Christianity is actually an amalgamation of various pagan practices that can adapt in the same fashion that Alexander the Great spread his empire through Hellenism. He would incorporate the cultures and religions of all the people who he conquered and integrated all of them into society. And that's why you see Christianity integrate so well with Western cultures. That's not what the people of Elohim are supposed to do, though. They're not supposed to water down their faith, compromise, and conform in order to win souls. They're supposed to remain separate and set apart from their pagan friends, neighbors, and even family members, so as not to become infected or tainted by what Yah describes as an abomination. And this is the struggle that so many coming out of mainstream Christianity face. Some have trouble stepping fully out of the snare. In Deuteronomy 12:29 through 31, we read, "When Yah your Elohim cuts off from you before you the nations which you go to dispossess, and you displace them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you are not ensnared to follow them after they are destroyed from before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? I also will do likewise. You shall not worship Yah your Elohim in that way, for every abomination to Yah which he hates they have done to their gods, for they burn even their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods." And it's interesting because Santa Claus actually can be traced back to Chemosh, and he was the god that people used to put their children into, drop them into his mouth and into his belly where there would be a great fire. And so we're worshiping, or at least revering, this figure who has ancient pagan roots that Yah says are an abomination that he hates. Yah hates the pagan practices that surround us in this modern culture, and he considers them a snare. He hates the pagan practices that Christians have adopted, and sadly, most Christians are trapped in the snare of Babylon. When the scriptures warn, "Come out of her, my people," this is exactly what is being referred to, and the consequences of remaining in Babylon are deadly. Revelation 18:4 says, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues.'" So ultimately, we have a choice to make. It's the same choice that people have had to make throughout history when their traditions conflict with the truth. You either choose to follow those traditions or you follow truth. The celebration of Christmas is one of those choices that every Christian must deal with. We've already seen that the origin and timing is all pagan, and the Christian celebration of Christmas on December 25th is a complete fiction, including the name of the one who was supposedly born on that date. Now, there's no commandment to observe December 25th as an appointed time, and there's no evidence that the Hebrew Messiah named Yeshua was born on that date. In fact, we're given a specific sign to confirm that he was born on a specific scriptural appointed time linked to the kings of Judah, as well as the resurrection. And Revelation 12:1 gives us the signs that occurred in the heavens when Yeshua was born. It says, "Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth." Now, I discuss in my Walk in the Light series book, The Messiah, that sign and when it happened and how it happened in great detail. So while Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus on December 25th, those who follow the Messiah commemorate the birth of Yeshua on day 1 of month 7 on the Creator's calendar, a date that is specifically embedded in the scriptures as a Sabbath, a memorial, and a set-apart rehearsal. And we read about that in Leviticus 23:24. It says, "In the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a Shabbaton, a memorial of blasting," and blast in Hebrew is teruah, a set-apart convocation. So this involves more than just getting the date right. It's all about who you remember and who you serve. Who do you look to for your salvation? And this is ultimately what brings joy to the world, because the light has come. Yeshua said, "I am the light of the world," in John 8:12. Yeshua should be the reason for the season on the day of blasting, Yom Teruah, in month 7. Instead, Christians claim that Jesus is the reason for the season around the winter solstice. They're following the traditions of Babylon over the truth of Yah, and this is a critical mistake. In Acts we read, "Nor is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved." Now, not only are Christians celebrating at the wrong time, they're worshiping the wrong names. You cannot properly worship Elohim when you don't even know his name. Just because an English translation of the Bible replaces the name of Yah with the title "the Lord" does not mean it's correct. And just because an English Bible inserts the name Jesus for the Hebrew Messiah named Yeshua does not mean it's proper to use that name. The name Jesus is an English name deriving from a Greek name attributed to a child of Zeus. The Hebrew language does not have a letter J, and no language on the planet had a letter J when Yeshua was born in month 7 and later died on a Roman execution stake in month 1 on the Creator's calendar. In fact, the English language would not come into existence for approximately 15 centuries later. It was impossible for the Messiah to be named Jesus. And Jesus is not a translation or even a transliteration of his Hebrew name. The name Joshua would be the closest English name, not Jesus. Now, this is also not hard to figure out with a little research, and it really matters that we get this right. I remember having this discussion with my late mother-in-law, whose name is Mary Jane. She was raised in the Christian religion all of her life and taught that the name of the Son of Elohim was Jesus. Now, when I told her that Jesus was not the real name of the Messiah, she was really taken aback. When I revealed that his true name was Yeshua, her first response was, well, that Jesus was his English name. Well, we went around and around about translating names and that you don't translate names until I finally said, okay, I'll just call you marijuana from now on. I'll never forget the look on her face. She was so shocked. How could I call her such an offensive thing? I told her, well, that was her name in Spanish, so I would just translate her name and I would use her Spanish name from now on, even if it offended her. Well, she got the point. She did not identify with the Spanish, the translation, in the Spanish language named marijuana. In fact, she was offended by it. She identified with the English name Mary Jane that was given to her at birth. Likewise, Yeshua must be called by his Hebrew name given to him at birth, not some English name that never existed until the English language was invented. It was tough to let go of Jesus, but I'm happy to say that she got it. She made the right choice. She chose the truth over tradition. And this is the ultimate test. If we love him, then we love his name and his ways, rather than the false traditions that we have been taught. Every Christmas, people who claim to worship the Hebrew Messiah of Yisrael participate in a pagan ritual deriving from the Roman celebration of Saturnalia. Indeed, the Christian celebration of Christmas is so closely connected to the worship of the Roman Mithras, that the Roman god Mithras, that you could interchange Jesus and Mithras without much difference or confusion. It's like a seamless match. All of the traditions of Christmas come from paganism, including the Christmas tree and the decorations, as we saw warned by Jeremiah. But wait a minute, one might proclaim. That's not what it means to me. When I participate in these pagan rituals, I'm doing it for Jesus, not the Nimrod or Mithras. I hear that a lot, but the simple fact is that it really doesn't matter what it means to you, but rather what it means to Yah. And the scriptures tell us what it means to Yah. And we read about that in Deuteronomy 12:29 through 32 already. And it's an abomination, and he hates it. And he hates it when we worship him like the nations, because it is an abomination. And he doesn't want us participating in these abominations. And just like the Israelites coming out of Egypt, we have inherited false worship from the nations. Rome has convinced many that it was okay and actually developed the ideal one world religion that can accommodate all pagans. But those who are in the covenant renewed by the blood of Yeshua are commanded not to mix pagan traditions with the worship of Elohim. The celebration of Christmas is an abomination in the eyes of Yah, and it's that simple. Every year, people have a choice to make. Will they separate from Babylon and follow truth, or continue in pagan traditions involving the worship of the hosts of heaven? Now, I produced a video entitled, Should Christians Celebrate Christmas? And you can find it on YouTube, and I'll put a link below after I post this. And it addresses this subject, and I invite you to watch it. Consider sending the link to friends and family who may still be immersed in pagan practices. Now, those who recognize that Christmas has pagan origins often look to Hanukkah as an alternative festival. Let's face it, most people grew up with those warm and fuzzy feelings around Christmas time, and they like it. It would be ideal to simply transfer all of those memories and emotions into something else, a new and different religious holiday that is acceptable. Well, as a result, many try to use Hanukkah as a substitute for Christian, whether they're willing to admit it or not, and that can be a mistake. Hanukkah falls on day 25 of month 9 on the scriptural calendar, and it's an 8-day celebration that spans from December 1st to December 8th this year. It's not one of the Moedim, or the appointed times commanded in the Torah, although it is a time of historical and even scriptural significance. But it must be understood in its context, and it's a celebration that the house of Judah actually incorporated into their religious observance, and it's an integral part of the religion of Judaism. It's not necessarily that applicable to the house of Yisrael that's still in exile and didn't experience the events as the house of Judah did. But like I say, it has historical and even scriptural significance, and it has value to look at it, but not necessarily participate in as a religious holiday. I produced a two-part series several years ago on the subject of Hanukkah, and it's actually very relevant for today. The circumstances that the house of Israel was under, and the lure of Hellenism that was on the Judeans is very similar to what we see going on in society today. So I encourage you to view them both if you haven't already. They're entitled Hanukkah to Celebrate or Not to Celebrate, Part 1 and Part 2. At the end of Part 2, I encouraged people to use this time of reflection as a reset as we continue to separate from the world. It can be a time when we remember the cleansing of the former temple and commit to cleansing our own temples. And how amazing that the world is currently attempting its own great reset, intended to corral the masses into a new world order. And they're using salvation from a virus as the driving force. They're unifying people around the hope of science and a vaccine that will actually pollute their bodily temples. And those who follow Yah should be guarding and cleansing their temples and should avoid these things at all cost. If you choose to observe Hanukkah, then you need to know how to tell time according to the Torah, because even the Jewish calendar got it wrong this year. You also need to avoid all of the Jewish traditions associated with it. I personally don't officially celebrate Hanukkah because it is so intimately associated with rabbinic Judaism and the traditions of the Pharisees. Yeshua spoke out against the leaven of the Scribes and Pharisees, which was their doctrines and traditions. And last week, we looked at the subject of binding and loosing. The Scribes and the Pharisees thought they had the authority to interpret the Torah and declare what was prohibited by binding and authorized by loosing, according to the Torah. Yeshua ended up giving that authority, the authority to bind and loose, to his disciples. And let's examine an important passage where Yeshua addressed the traditions of the scribes and Pharisees, and we read about that in Matthew 15, 1-9. It says, Then the scribes and Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Yeshua, saying, Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. He answered and said to them, Why do you also transgress the commandment of Elohim because of your tradition? For Elohim commanded, saying, Honor your father and your mother. And he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, Whoever says to his father or mother, Whatever profit you might have received me is of a gift. Whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift to Elohim. Then he need not honor his father or mother. Thus, you have made the commandment of Elohim of no effect by your tradition. Hypocrites! Well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. So Yeshua was telling them that they were actually transgressing the commandments through their traditions. Their traditions had actually been elevated above the commandments of Elohim. And this is exactly what people are doing when they celebrate Christmas. It's not just an innocent divergence from Yah, it is a direct disobedience. And they're actually replacing the appointed times of Yah with pagan celebrations. The passage that Yeshua quoted from Isaiah is found in Isaiah 29 and reads as follows, beginning at 13. Therefore Yah said, Inasmuch as these people draw near with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but have removed their hearts far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the commandment of men. Therefore, behold, I will again do a marvelous work among this people, a marvelous work and a wonder, for the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hidden. Now, the context of that prophecy was against the people of Yah, who he considered blind and illiterate. They had things turned around, as the scriptures say. Their traditions were opposed to the commandments. It was like the clay trying to mold and shape the potter. And we read that in Isaiah 29:16. This is what it comes down to every day of our lives. Will we let the potter mold and shape us, or will we defy and resist the work of his hand? Now, there are many people who worship, but their worship is considered vanity. They're giving Yah lip service, but their actions reveal what is truly in their heart. Many people know the truth about Christmas, but they simply do not want to give it up. This demonstrates that even if we have truth, we must also have a love for the truth. Otherwise, we worship in vain. Now, last week I spoke about the true spiritual warfare, and Isaiah actually confirms that obedience from the heart is what really sets us free. And we read about that cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a shofar. Tell my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their Elohim. They ask of me the ordinance of justice. They take delight in approaching Elohim. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls? And you take no notice. In fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure and exploit all your laborers. Indeed, you fast for strife and debate and to strike with the fist of wickedness. You will not fast as you do this day to make your voice heard on high. Is it a fast that I have chosen? A day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head like a bulrush and to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Would you call this a fast and an acceptable day to Yah? Is this not the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out? When you see the naked, that you cover him, and not hide your flesh from hide yourself from your own flesh? Then your light shall break forth like the morning, your healing shall break forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory or the esteem of Yah shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and Yah will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, Here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and the speaking wickedness, if you extend your being to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. Yah will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought and strengthen your bones. You shall be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. Those from among you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. If you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my set-apart day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the set-apart day of Yah honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in Yah, and I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth, and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. The mouth of Yah has spoken. It's Isaiah 58, 1 through 4. Now, these are amazing promises for those who simply submit themselves to the commandments and express their love for Elohim with all of their heart, being, and strength. You don't need to go around actively engaging in spiritual warfare. Yah promises to loose the bonds of wickedness, to break every yoke, and to set you free. He states that he will heal you and be your rear guard. When you do find yourself in the heat of battle, you need to call upon him and be heard by him, and that's the important thing. We're heard by him when we follow his ways and conduct ourselves the way he wants us to. He fights your battles in the same way that he promised Abram that he would be his shield, his magen. You don't need to bind the devil, but we do need to bind his words. Deuteronomy 11:18 says, Therefore you shall lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, your nefesh, and bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. So what we see happening all around us during the Christmas season is vanity. And many Christians think that their actions are worship, but their hearts are far from him. It's time to tear down the Christmas trees and put up mezuzahs. We've talked about the commandment of the mezuzah, to write it on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. It's time to throw away your Star of David, your Magen David, which is literally the star of Saturn, and raise up the Magen of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is Yah, our Elohim. It's time for everyone who claims to worship the Elohim of Yisrael to put up or shut up. Your actions demonstrate your heart more than words alone. We need to write the commandments on the doorposts of our houses and on our gates and inscribe them on our hearts and in our minds so that we do them. And that is the circumcision of the heart through the renewed covenant that we read about in Deuteronomy and Jeremiah. It's time to reject the worship of Babylon and get cleaned up if you want to dwell and serve in the house of Elohim. We read in Isaiah 52, "Depart, depart, go out from there, touch no unclean thing. Go out from the midst of her, be clean, you who bear the vessels of Yah. For you shall not go out with haste, nor go by flight, for Yah will go before you, and the Elohim of Israel will be your rear guard." The celebration of Christmas is unclean, and we must depart from it and not touch it. Christmas is only one obvious example how Babylon separates us from Elohim. We need to avoid all of the snares set to entrap us, so that our worship is not vanity to Him. We must become true worshipers and always worship Him in spirit and in truth. John 4:23 through 24, the Messiah said, "But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship Him. Elohim is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth." Well, barakot to all of you. I hope you enjoyed this message. And if you are not signed up for the newsletter, I encourage you to go to our website, shemayisrael.net. Sign up for the weekly message that we send out. And always remember the Shema. Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Yisrael. Yahuwah your Elohim, Yahuwah is one. Yeshua, our Messiah, said that is the first commandment. And so that is what we need to focus on. And that is the focus of the work of Shema Yisrael, that we learn to love Him with all our heart, with all our strength, with all our might. So I hope you enjoyed this message, and go to our website where we have a lot of resources, a lot of teachings, and certainly if you have any questions, we're also available to receive questions through email. So go to the contact section, send us an email if you have a question, and stay tuned for future teachings. Shalom.